I think the register's gone round, and I think everybody's had a chance to sign it that's here. Do shout out if you haven't, though. I think it might be a good idea to, once we've done the apologies, to maybe go around and introduce ourselves. We've got a couple of new people this evening. I've got on here apologies from Councillor Evans, Councillor Freeman, Councillor Walsh, and Mr. Rudden. Do we have any others that anyone knows of? No? Okay. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Councillor Amy White, and I am the chair of the Standards Committee.
Hello, I'm Jane Lefevre, and I'm the Corporate Director for Governance and Community Strategy, and I am also the Council's Monitoring Officer.
Excuse me, Chair, I think we need to use our microphone.
Yeah, if we could just make sure we use the microphone so that we're picked up by the video casting.
Richard Brown, independent member.
Councillor Jonathan Coop, member for Flixton Ward.
Karen Barkley, member for Bowden Ward.
Linda Blackburn, councillor in Davyhulme East.
Mike Whiting, independent person.
I'm Patrick Myers, I'm the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Group.
Alex Murray, Democratic and Scrutiny Officer.
Denise Weston, councillor in Broadheath Ward.
David Jarman, councillor in Longford Ward.
David Goodman, independent co-optee.
Thank you, everybody. So the first thing to do is to receive the minutes as a correct record of the meeting last time. Are we all in agreement and that's a fair record of the meeting in October? Yep. It does seem like a long time ago. But yeah, so happy with those. And move on to item 3, which is the Committee on Standards in Public Life review into local government ethical standards. And this will be to receive a report, well, receive the report from the Corporate Director of Governance and Community Strategy.
Hello. Yes, you will have obviously got within your pack, you've got a short covering report. You've got the complete review document that has been published by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And you've also got a short document which is prepared by the Association of Democratic Services Officers, which is a review of the review and is actually quite helpful because it summarises it quite well, really. I think the key thing here is this was a review that was launched in 2018 and was meant to be a comprehensive review of how the standards regime was faring following the amendments that had been made and the shift away from the centralised regulation of standards through the Standards Board for England and putting it out into the local authorities. So it sort of focused on 4 key areas: the code of conduct and interests, registration of interests generally, the issue of sanctions, the role of the independent person, the monitoring officer and the standards committee, and also the support that was available for parish councils in relation to standards issues. It also looked at how, in the current climate, we could promote high standards of conduct in local government in particular. There were some specific areas of concern which were identified. I think it's fair to say that the view of the committee was that standards were generally quite high in local government, but that there were some pockets of bad behaviour, that there were some areas where things could be improved, and there were some particular areas of risk. And so, as I say, in terms of particular areas of concern that they had, they identified issues around bullying and harassment, in particular in some local authorities. And there are recommendations around that, which are looking at including bullying and harassment within all codes of conduct, and defining them more clearly so that they become an area that is more easy to deal with when complaints are received on that particular ground. And the other area of concern was around parish councils, where I think there were concerns particularly around a propensity towards a lot of small level complaints that really bogged parish councils down a lot, and also the level of support that was available to parish councils, which changed when they brought in the Localism Act and left parish councils with less support than they had had previously around issues of standards. They identified two specific risk areas, one around rules and conflicts of the rules around conflicts of interest and gifts and hospitality. I think it was felt that that was an area that needed further clarification. And they also identified an increased complexity around local government decision making, which they felt placed good governance under strain. And that's particularly around the fact that local government bodies are often setting up now other bodies that work with them, so joint ventures, partnerships, companies, other bodies that work alongside the council and are effectively council bodies, but which are not subject to the same rules. So I think there were concerns generally about the decision making and governance in those areas and around transparency and openness of their decision making. So there are recommendations that look to put more robust safeguards in place. In terms of the specific recommendations made, I'll come back to those but sort of just to highlight some of them. They've recommended the introduction of a power of suspension, a model code of conduct, which would be a form that could be adopted by all local authorities. They're not actually suggesting that it is made mandatory, but they are suggesting that there is more definition given than is currently available. They're looking to strengthen the role of the independent person, which would include a role for the independent person in the event that suspensions are introduced. It would give the independent person a role in appeals against suspensions, and wider powers more generally. And the other area where they're recommending changes is around, again, sort of measures to give rise to sort of greater transparency. So if you turn to the ADSO document, which is where the recommendations are probably most helpfully set out, I think the first thing I'd say, though, is that many of these recommendations would require government action. They would require legislation before they could be put in to force. So what we've got is we've got a series of recommendations that are made here, but we've also got a recommended sort of areas of best practice. And so the report invites you to sort of consider these recommendations, although I'm not certain how much you can do, given that it's not within your control with many of these to actually be able to implement them. There's no further say for local authorities at this point in the process. What we would expect to happen next would be that that central government would respond to the document that's being produced by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, so that we would expect a response from them, and they will then indicate whether they would take matters forward in primary or secondary legislation. And we have been here before with some of these recommendations. There were changes made previously, recommendations that were made for change that were made previously when the committee last reported, but they were not taken up by government at that stage. So there's no guarantee that they will be. But I don't know how you would like to deal with this. So say there are a number of recommendations here. which if you wish to discuss them, then that would be fine. But you could discuss them on the basis that they fed into the best practice review. But what we are recommending in the report is that we actually come back with a feasibility study which would pick up all the areas of recommended good practice with a view to implementing those. And it may well be that what we do is we sort of pick up on some of these in terms of the spirit of these recommendations more generally. So I'm in your hands really on that.
Well, does anyone have any particular comments they want to make at this stage?
Or any questions?
Or any questions?
Could I? Yeah. You said a bit more about that, and is that likely to?
Yeah, I think that what they're recommending is that there is a stronger but rebuttable presumption that councillors' public behaviour, including comments that are made through public media, etc., will always be considered to be made in their public capacity, which is quite a move away from what we had before, where you had to actually demonstrate that that a member was acting in their official capacity at that time. So I think it sort of puts the onus onto the member then to actually have to demonstrate that they are not acting in an official capacity, rather than on the complainant to actually demonstrate that, or the monitoring officer to be satisfied that they were. So I think it is quite a difference of emphasis there.
And that should make life a lot easier.
It
Possibly.
should. It will make it. Yes, I think it will make it clearer to some extent, because I think I think it's very difficult for members of the public to accept that some of the distinctions that would have applied in the past in that respect. So I think it helps in that respect. And I think it also matches the expectation that the public have, that if you're in public office, your actions as a whole should be of the highest standard and of integrity. So I think in that respect, it reflects very much what the view of the public might well be towards those that are in public office.
Councillor Barclay, did you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. If you don't mind, I did read when I was reading the document online that there were 10 recommendations or maybe more, but we were actually implementing some already. So I'm sure I didn't make that up. I haven't kind of dreamt it. But one of the extra ones that we need to look at was something that concerned me, in that it would be good to have some action quite soon on this one, and that's having public addresses or addresses removed from the council websites. Register of members' interests. Have I dreamt that up, or was that actually in the document?
No, you haven't dreamt any of that.
It's just I can't find it now looking through the papers.
No. I think that's it. There's a lot of there are quite a lot of papers here. The reference to the number of recommendations, I think there are actually more. There's about 26, is it, or something like that, recommendations in terms of best practice, and we already do meet quite a few of those, and that's the area where we would be looking to bring that back to you with sort of a fuller report showing what we do, what we can do better, and how we can adopt those steps, and I think that's absolutely right that we do that. There's also an element of a stick that follows behind that, because the committee is going to review local authorities in 2020 to see the extent to which they have accepted those principles of best practice as well. The recommendation around the disclosure of members' home address and details, that is something which is currently you're required to note on the register of your interests, any property that you own, and your obviously your home address will come up on that. And it has been recognised that that is potentially an issue with current concerns around safety and security. However, that would require legislation to change that. So it is a recommendation that it is changed, but it is not something that it was within our gift to change at this stage. The only exception being that if there are particular reasons why you're if there is a specific security risk, then you can apply to have a dispensation in respect of that at this stage. But it's not something that we can unilaterally do at this point in time. But I think that is one. I may be wrong, but I think that's one of the ones that falls within secondary legislation, so it'd be easier for them to change quickly.
Right, okay. And the reason I raise that is because I've actually had 2 pieces of hate mail through the post, and only recently had one, and also Councillor Weston's had the same, which was, I found to be quite disturbing and chilling. So when I read that, I thought that would be a really excellent move. I mean, I think all of the recommendations should be really followed up as far as we can. But if there's anything we can do to lobby for that change, I would support that. Thank you.
Can I suggest as well that if you've received communications to that effect, that if you want to pass them through me, I think the other thing is you should consider whether or not it's something that should be referred to the police as well. I don't know how serious these are, but it's something you should consider.
Yeah, can I just say I have a similar, I think Councillor Barclay's actually got hers there. Mine was in my pigeonhole at the town hall yesterday. I just binned it. I can't say it upset me, that perhaps I'm a bit toughened, but it's my understanding, can I just clarify that the address thing, I mean, obviously you have to register your interest somewhere, but it's my understanding that in future it doesn't have to have your home address on ballot papers. Is that one of the changes that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You were listening at the briefing. But yes, it is. When you do the home address forms now, if you're in your nomination to be a candidate in elections, there is a part 2 which you can complete. It's not obligatory, but you can complete it so that your actual address is left off the ballot paper, and it just records the fact that you are resident within Trafford instead.
Okay. I mean, my concern is if Councillor Barclay's had this mail to her home address, somebody's got to be pretty keen, really, to find where the register of interest is. Do you think? Or?
We can find it on the website.
Yes, it may well be that it's just on the website rather than just in the register of interest. It depends what details you've actually have made public previously. So I would suggest if it's a website issue, you go and everybody just checks their entries there. They were sort of verging away from standards and onto other issues, but it's important. Security is important. So you can check your website details, and if there are any concerns about those, then we can look to change that if you wish, and if we're able to do so. Okay.
Well, similar sort of thing. I think it demonstrates what sort of political climate we're in these days with the internet and people, with what's going on with, I don't know, Brexit and all. The way the politics is polarised, people feel emboldened to do this type of thing. But just this week, I've had a letter, an anonymous letter put out to residents in my name, saying certain stuff and to get in touch with me about a certain issue, which I had no knowledge or certainly didn't consent to. And basically, quite a few irate people either ringing me with my contact details on or emailing me. One of the biggest complaints was, why haven't I got the letter when my neighbours got it, and things like this. So I had to point out was quite happy to talk about the issue that it was referring to. But I had to point out that the letter was nothing at all to do with me. But I mean, we're obviously living in different times now where people feel. I've actually managed to find out who it is, and I've had quite strong words with them, but they weren't very apologetic. They obviously thought they were trying to help in some way.
Okay, so Councillor Myers.
Yes, thank you. I think it sounds like we've all had our fair share of hate mail and aggressive telephone calls. I remember when we had some money deposited with Barings Bank when they went bust. In fact, Dave Jarman will remember this. We got we overnight. We apparently lost, and Ray will remember as well. We apparently lost £300 million overnight, which fortunately was paid back very quickly. But it was I got at least 15 or 16 letters then from people who were a bit annoyed we lost their money. What I would say is I think that standards are very high in Trafford. You know, when you compare our borough here with many of the other boroughs I visited, standards are very high generally. Looking at the list of recommendations and suggestions, some of it can be done by statutory instrument, which presumably will be fairly quickly if we decided, or if the country decided to go ahead with it. But others would require primary legislation. And I'm not sure whether in the foreseeable future there's going to be any time for primary legislation at all. The government seem to be concerned with other matters.
That's a fair point. So is everyone happy? Would you like to respond?
So I think what I would suggest then, because and what might be useful for you, because we're going to bring this back to look at the recommendations that are linked to the to the code of best practice that they're suggesting that we introduce. So we're going to go through those, and we will evaluate how and when we would be able to implement them, and the extent to which we're already acting in accordance with them. So I think that what would probably be useful then, rather than, as I say, I don't think it would serve much to go through a full discussion of the wider recommendations at this stage, because you have little control over those. But what we will do is we'll include within that report, when we bring it back to the next meeting, a table which sets out which of these are primary legislation, which is secondary legislation. We'll pick up if there's been any response at that stage by government, either informally or formally, to the report as well. Any indications about when other changes might be implemented. So we'll give you a more detailed implementation plan, as it were, which will cover both the recommendations in respect of the code more generally, and the best practice recommendations. Would that be acceptable to you?
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful. Yeah, is everyone in agreement about that? Okay, great. So we'll note those for now, and then we will look forward to hearing what is possible in the future. Okay, so item 4 is the Constitutional Working Group to receive an update from the Corporate Director of Governance and Community Strategy.
Seem to have had to do a lot of talking this week, but within your pack, you've got a spreadsheet which sets out it sets out all the recommendations that came out of the Constitutional Working Group around changes to the Constitution, or the way in which we conduct our business. And you'll see that with those questions at meetings, that's now in place. So we have the ability for members of the public now to place questions for all committee and executive meetings. The changes to the thresholds for petitions has been agreed by council, and again the constitution has been updated to reflect that. The quarterly e-bulletin that was being proposed which was to set out decisions that had been made to make them slightly more accessible than them being on the website, but also to include sort of information more generally. That's something that has been worked on, and we are going to be starting to publish those in the new municipal year. It was felt it would be better to make a start on that at that point. Webcasting, as you can see, is up and running. And has been used at all meetings, with the exception of one planning meeting, which took place across the road at the cricket club instead, to accommodate some particular needs of one of the objectors to an application around access. So we had the meeting over there and weren't able to webcast it. And also one of the licensing committee meetings where there were obviously issues of confidentiality relating to personal applicants. So those weren't webcast, but now all our meetings have been webcast. And there is, with your pack, there's a review of the webcasting, and you'll see the figures that we've been getting in terms of the hits on the website. Now, we don't know how many of those are re-reviews, but it is quite interesting. But I think planning is still the star of the show, and is probably still going to be. I really wonder why anybody would want to watch a council meeting sometimes, but having to sit through them, shouldn't say that sort of thing. But it is a very, very useful thing for the public more generally, because not everybody's able to get to our evening meetings, and it does mean that they can see what is being discussed. It does open the council up much more widely, and democracy becomes much more accessible to the public at large. So I think that's quite a positive step there. Motions at full council, we had some debate about that at the last meeting, and we are working on the informal protocol. Had discussions with the mayor and with the group leaders around this, and it's all agreed in principle. And again, that's something that we will be looking to have in place for the start of the next municipal year, and should hopefully help us to have a little more control over the business and the way that motions are dealt with. Questions by members at council, that was around having the questions available to be published on the website ahead of the meeting, again, to make them more accessible to the public. The appointment of an independent member of the Accounts Committee and the provision for substitute members of the Employment Committee, both of those have now been dealt with. So we're sort of pretty much up to date with all the constitutional changes that came out of those meetings.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Are we inviting comments for this? Or yeah, does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Councillor Myers.
Yeah, can I just ask you, with the numbers that were shown, for different committees and different number of people, do we know if they're just hit, so people have gone on and looked at it, or have they been on for the duration?
We can access the metadata for it. Usually it shows that even though you get like 50 hits, the actual viewing time is something about 8 minutes, which shows that there are a number of people just going on and just going straight back off it again. However, we have got quite a lot of them do show that at least one person has been like watching the full committee. I also received one email when a committee wasn't able to be webcast due to technical issues, an email from someone who was actually waiting and wanted to watch it. Also, it tells you when there's people waiting for the broadcast to start, and there's usually like at least 2 or 3 people waiting before it starts to watch it. I don't know if they're just officers or actual members of the public, but it seems to be working.
Fab, who knew it was so popular? Anyone else? Okay, so we'll note that then. And item number 5 is an update on the social media pledge, which was mentioned at the last meeting. And I believe it's Jane again.
Right. Really, just to let you know that following that having been approved by this committee, what we're now doing is we actually developed, we have a draft of a wider communications and media strategy, of which the social pledge will form. The social media pledge will form a part of that. We felt that it would be useful to address all areas at that time. I think the social media pledge is a very important individual part of it, but in order to support it better, we felt that we needed the wider strategy as well, because it fits better within that context. And the aim is still to get that through and get it approved. And at the point that that is, then the first council meeting that we're going to have, we will be leaving a copy of the pledge on everybody's seat at that point, in the hope that they can sign it and leave it at the meeting. We thought that was perhaps an easier way to try and get everybody to sign up. But it is important because, again, this is sort of tying it in for the next municipal year. We're tying it in with more extensive training around issues such as social media things. So I think it will sort of give it a much more context. I think there was some concerns about some members when we were discussing it that night around it sort of being seen in isolation. And I think that by making it part of an overall strategy that deals with all elements of the way in which communications and media things are handled, I think will give it a better foundation, really.
I'll be making the pledge that I don't use it.
I think that was noted last time too.
Any other comments on that, or everybody happy? Fab. Okay, so number 6 is the monitoring officer's report from the monitoring officer.
Right. Well, this is just my sort of roundup that comes up at every meeting, really, just to much of what we've been doing is covered within the agenda items, but there are other functions that I have to fulfil as monitoring officer. So part of that is to ensure that I attend and observe a range of council meetings over time to make sure that those are being run effectively. So I've now, I think the only ones that I haven't attended this year is an example of a licensing committee and an example of health and the Health and Wellbeing Board. But I have dipped into meetings to ensure that so I'm there either because I'm required to be there on official business, but I have gone in a capacity as an observer to some meetings. I have to be able to provide assurance around the decision-making processes. So again, it's around ensuring that the notices are published in sufficient time. So this is where we have key decisions that notices are published in advance, that in terms of the decision-making process, we comply with all the aspects of that. And that's something we have quite a robust tracking system through the council. Again, there's sort of no issues that are flagging up on a regular basis. We have the very occasional case where we have to take a decision on an urgent basis, which means that it's excluded from the call-in process, but they are very few and far between. and we have had no non-compliant decisions that I have had to report on to council at all throughout the past year. In terms of standards, as Councillor Myers said, you know, I think I feel very lucky as a monitoring officer that members are generally very well behaved and courteous towards each other and to the people that they represent, and that they do generally demonstrate very high standards in terms of the way in which they behave. And we've had, since the last meeting, I have had one very minor issue that was referred to me that was dealt with entirely informally. It was not wanted to be taken forward as a standards complaint, but that's it since October. So again, it sort of underlines the general feeling within the council around levels of behaviour, and I have had no referrals at all about anything from any of the parishes either. Although I wouldn't want to say that doesn't mean to say that there isn't anything going on there, but we won't go there. So, but generally, as I say, there are no specific issues. In terms of constitutional changes, we've had a full report on that. At the moment, there's nothing further in the pipeline, although the constitutional working group is continuing to meet, sort of see off the final bits of business that we have there. I don't think there's anything else that I would add at this stage. Okay.
Fabulous, thank you, and well done everyone on your impeccable behaviour. Does anyone have any questions? No, nothing to add there. Great. And is there any urgent business? No, nothing urgent, nothing pressing anyone. Fab. Well, that's it then. I think we can close the meeting at that point. Thank you, everyone. Good night.